Dark money is destroying our democracy. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's voice cut through the Senate Budget Committee hearing room like a blade. Sharp, confident, unmistakable. She stood at the witness table, one hand gripping the microphone, the other gesturing with the kind of emphatic precision that had made her a social media phenomenon. Her signature red lipstick caught the harsh C-SPAN lights. Her hoop earring swayed slightly as she turned her head to scan the rows of senators before her. The gallery was packed. Reporters sat with laptops open, fingers hovering over keyboards. Congressional aides lined the walls, arms crossed, watching. This was the kind of hearing that would generate headlines, and everyone in the room knew it. Billionaires and corporations are buying elections while working families struggle to pay rent, AOC continued, her Brooklyn accent punching through each syllable. She paused, letting the words settle over the room like dust after an explosion. Then her voice rose again, harder now, angrier. And the politicians in this room. She turned, her finger extending toward the Republican side of the dais. Take millions from corporate PACs, and then vote against the interests of the people who elected them. Senator Ted Cruz sat motionless in his high-backed leather chair. His fingers were steepled beneath his chin. His face revealed nothing, no anger, no amusement, no reaction whatsoever. He hadn't moved in 15 minutes. His eyes, however, never left AOC. They tracked her movements with the patient, unhurried focus of a predator watching prey that didn't yet know it was being hunted. AOC turned to face him directly. The cameras swiveled to capture the moment. This was the shot every network wanted, the progressive firebrand calling out the conservative senator, live on television. Senator Cruz, she said, her voice dropping into a more accusatory register. You've taken over $2 million from oil and gas companies. $2 million. And then you vote against climate legislation every single time. She let the silence stretch for a beat. That's not representation, that's corruption. The word hung in the air. Corruption. She'd said it. She'd called him corrupt on the record in front of cameras with the entire political world watching. Cruz's voice, when it finally came, was quiet. So quiet that several people in the gallery leaned forward to hear. Congresswoman. AOC stopped mid-gesture, her finger still raised. I have a question for you. His Texas drawl made each word feel heavier than it should, like stones dropping into still water. He leaned forward slightly, just enough that the microphone caught every syllable with perfect clarity. His eyes remained locked on hers. Before you finish your lecture about dark money and corruption, he paused, and in that pause something shifted in the room. The reporters stopped typing. The aides stopped whispering. Even the sound of shuffling papers ceased. What is brand new Congress LLC? Silence. Not the comfortable silence of a pause between speakers. Not the thoughtful silence of consideration. The heavy, suffocating silence of a trap snapping shut. AOC's hand lowered slowly. Her confident expression flickered, just for a fraction of a second, but the cameras caught it. Every single one of them. That's not relevant to. Oh, I think it's very relevant. Cruz reached down beside his chair. His movements were deliberate, unhurried, the actions of a man who had all the time in the world because he knew exactly where this was going. He lifted a thick manila folder onto the table in front of him. The sound of it hitting the wood echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. You've spent the last 15 minutes lecturing this committee about dark money, Cruz said, his voice still quiet, still calm. About transparency, about politicians hiding where their funds come from. He opened the folder with the kind of precision that suggested he'd done this before, many times in many courtrooms. So let me tell you about brand new Congress LLC. He pulled out the first document, holding it up so the cameras could see it, though the text was too small for anyone in the gallery to read. It's a company that received over $800,000 from political action committees associated with your campaign. He set the document down and pulled out another. A company controlled by your chief of staff. Another document. A company that, according to our research, doesn't appear to be registered in any state in America. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The sound was audible, unmistakable. Reporters began typing frantically, their fingers hammering keys. Cruz continued as if he hadn't heard any of it. A company where nearly $1 million from working-class donors, The very people you claim to represent simply vanished. He looked up from the folder, his eyes finding AOCs across the room. No disclosure, no accounting, no transparency. The pause that followed felt eternal. You want to talk about dark money, Congresswoman? Cruz's voice remained perfectly level, perfectly controlled. Let's talk about your dark money. AOC's voice rose sharply, defensively. That is a gross mischaracterization. Is it? Cruz interrupted her so smoothly it seemed choreographed. He pulled out another document, this one stapled together, multiple pages thick. Because I have FEC complaints. I have financial records. I have statements from former Federal Election Commission officials saying your operation makes no sense unless you were trying to hide something. He held up the document so she could see it, though he didn't need to read from it. He clearly had every word memorized. So before you lecture this committee about corruption, Cruz said, his voice finally hardening, losing that quiet control and gaining an edge sharp enough to cut. Maybe you should explain why your own operation ran what appears to be the largest dark money scheme in progressive politics. The chamber erupted, voices shouting, senators trying to be heard over each other, Chairman Lindsey Graham's gavel banging repeatedly, the sharp crack of wood on wood barely audible over the chaos. Reporters were standing now, phones out, already filing stories. This was the moment. This was the clip that would dominate every news cycle for the next week. Through it all, Cruz sat perfectly still, his eyes never leaving AOC. And through it all, one image would be seared into the memory of everyone watching. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the voice of progressive politics, sitting at the witness table with no response, no defense, no words. Because what could she possibly say? Before we continue with what happened next in that hearing room, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This story gets deeper, darker, and more revealing than anyone expected. You won't want to miss what comes next. The gavel finally restored some semblance of order. Chairman Graham's voice boomed through the speakers, cutting through the residual murmur. The committee will come to order. Senator Cruz, you have the floor. Cruz nodded once slowly with the satisfied gravity of a chess player who just announced checkmate in 6 moves. He adjusted his microphone, bringing it closer. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted. No longer confrontational, no longer even particularly emotional. This was the voice of a prosecutor. The voice of a man who had argued 9 cases before the United States Supreme Court and won 5 of them. Methodical, precise, deadly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Cruz pulled the folder closer. I want to walk the American people through exactly what Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez's operation did, step by step, dollar by dollar. He extracted the first document, laying it flat on the table in front of him. In 2016, a man named Saket Chakrabarty created something called the Brand New Congress PAC. Cruz looked up briefly. The stated mission was noble: elect regular working people to Congress, give voice to the voiceless, fight the establishment. His voice carried no sarcasm, no mockery. He was simply stating facts, letting them speak for themselves. In 2017, Chakrabarty created another PAC called Justice Democrats. Same mission, same message. Cruz paused, his finger tracing a line on the document in front of him. Together, these 2 organizations raised approximately $3.3 million, most of it in small donations. $27 here, $50 there. Working people sending what they could spare because they believed in the cause. His voice softened just slightly, and in that softening was something that sounded almost like sympathy. Teachers, nurses, students drowning in debt. They gave their money because they thought they were funding a revolution, funding candidates who would fight for them. Then his voice hardened again, the sympathy evaporating like morning dew under a Texas sun. But here's where it gets interesting, Congresswoman. Cruz flipped to another page, his movements still deliberate, still unhurried. Those 2 PACs transferred over $1 million to 2 private companies, Brand New Congress LLC and Brand New Campaign LLC, both controlled by Saket Chakrabarty, the same man who ran your campaign and later became your chief of staff. He looked directly at AOC. She sat rigid, her hands flat on the table in front of her, her knuckles white. Now, why does that matter? Cruz asked, as if he were teaching a law school class. Because PACs have to disclose everything. Every dollar in, every dollar out. The American people have a right to know where political money goes. He leaned forward. But LLCs, private companies, they have no disclosure requirements. Once that money hit those LLCs, it vanished. Nobody knows where it went. Nobody knows who got paid. Nobody knows if it was used for legitimate campaign purposes or, he paused meaningfully, for something else entirely. AOC grabbed her microphone. Senator, those were legitimate payments for strategic consulting. Strategic consulting. Cruz repeated the words slowly as if tasting them, finding them bitter. That's the label that appears on every single payment. Over $1 million, and every single transaction just says strategic consulting. No details, no breakdown, no explanation. He pulled out another document, this one with highlighted passages. Let me read you what former FEC Associate General Counsel Adav Nodi said about your operation. This is a man who spent years enforcing campaign finance law. Cruz adjusted his reading glasses. Quote, none of that makes any sense. They're either confused or they're trying to conceal something. End quote. He let that statement hang in the air like smoke. Former FEC Chairman Brad Smith called it, quote, a really weird situation. Another campaign finance expert said, quote, I can't even begin to disentangle that. Cruz looked up. These are nonpartisan experts, Congresswoman, people who have seen every trick in the book, and your operation left them baffled. He flipped to another page. But here's the truly remarkable part. We tried to find Brand New Congress LLC. We searched Delaware corporate records since that's where Brand New Campaign LLC was registered. Nothing. We searched New York. Nothing. We searched every state database we could access. Cruz's voice dropped lower, taking on an ominous quality. Brand New Congress LLC does not appear to be registered anywhere. A company that received over $800,000 from political action committees doesn't officially exist. There's no record of where or when it was incorporated. He looked up at AOC, and the silence that followed felt like pressure building before a storm. So I'll ask you directly, Congresswoman, where is Brand New Congress LLC registered? Where did that money go? And why does a company that received nearly $1 million have no official existence? Silence. AOC's jaw tightened. Behind her, her press secretary was frantically scribbling notes on a legal pad, her pen moving so fast the paper was nearly tearing. Beside Cruz, Senator Josh Hawley leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed, watching with the satisfied expression of someone witnessing a master class in political destruction. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, Democrat from Rhode Island, leaned into his microphone. Mr. Chairman, I object to this line of questioning. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez is a witness on campaign finance reform, not the subject of an investigation. With respect, Senator Whitehouse, Cruz interrupted smoothly, not even looking at him. The Congresswoman spent 15 minutes lecturing this committee about dark money and corruption. I think it's entirely appropriate to examine whether her own operation meets the standards she's demanding of everyone else. He turned back to AOC. You called dark money the enemy of democracy. Those are your exact words, Congresswoman. You've said corporate PACs are destroying our politics. You've demanded transparency from everyone else. Cruz's voice rose slightly, just enough to convey righteous indignation without losing control. But your own operation funneled over $1 million through private companies with no disclosure. Your own PACs paid a company that doesn't appear to exist. Your own chief of staff controlled entities that swallowed donors' money into a black hole. He closed the folder with a sharp snap that echoed through the chamber. That's not transparency, Congresswoman. That's the very definition of dark money. The only difference between your operation and the corporate PACs you attack is that they actually follow the law. The words landed like hammer blows. In the gallery, a woman shook her head slowly. A reporter whispered something to his colleague. Someone's phone buzzed, the sound audible in the tense silence. Cruz opened his second folder. The room had grown uncomfortably quiet. Even the usual background noise, coughing, chairs creaking, papers shuffling, had stopped. "Let's continue down the money trail," Cruz said, his voice taking on that conversational tone again, the calm before another assault. "Congresswoman, who is Riley Roberts?" AOC's eyes narrowed. "My partner, I don't see what." "Your partner, your live-in boyfriend, the man who, since you've taken office, has been given a congressional email address and access to your official schedule." Cruz nodded slowly, as if she just confirmed something important. "Let me tell you what your partner has to do with this investigation." He pulled out an FEC filing, holding it up to the light. August 2017. Brand new Congress PAC makes a payment of $3,000 to Riley Roberts. The description, marketing consulting. He flipped to another page. September 2017. Another payment, $3,000, same description, marketing consulting. Cruz looked up. "Total payments to your boyfriend from a PAC controlled by your chief of staff, $6,000. He set the documents down carefully. Now, by itself, that might not seem significant. People get paid for campaign work all the time. But let's look at the context. Cruz pulled out a timeline, a document he'd clearly prepared in advance, with dates and numbers highlighted in different colors. In the summer of 2017, your campaign was in serious trouble. By October, you had raised only $3,375, but you had already spent over $27,000. More than half of that, over $18,000, went to your chief of staff's company, Brand New Congress LLC. He paused, letting the numbers sink in. Your campaign was nearly bankrupt. You were spending money you didn't have. And right in the middle of this financial crisis, the PAC controlled by your chief of staff starts paying your boyfriend." Cruz's voice grew harder. A political analyst named Luke Thompson looked at these payments. His conclusion, and I quote, "It looks to me like Chakrabarty was effectively reimbursing AOC for a third of her expenses with Brand New Congress LLC, perhaps so that she would stay in the race despite her mounting debt." AOC leaned into her microphone. "Riley provided legitimate marketing services." "What services?" Cruz shot back immediately. "What specific marketing did your boyfriend provide? What deliverables? What work product? Because the FEC filings don't say, just marketing consulting. That's it. $6,000 for services nobody can describe." He pulled out another document. The Coolidge-Reagan Foundation filed an FEC complaint specifically about these payments. They cited, and I quote, "the vague and amorphous nature of the services Riley ostensibly provided, the relatively small amount of money raised by the campaign at that stage, and this is important, the romantic relationship between Ocasio-Cortez and Riley." Cruz's voice dropped to a near whisper that somehow carried through the entire chamber. "Federal law is very clear, Congresswoman. Campaign contributions shall not be converted by any person to personal use. If money flowed from donors to a PAC, from the PAC to your boyfriend, and from your boyfriend to you, that's not a campaign expense. That's potentially federal election fraud." Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat from Connecticut, interrupted. "Mr. Chairman, these are serious allegations without any." "They're not my allegations, Senator Murphy," Cruz replied calmly. "They're in an official FEC complaint. I'm simply reading from public records." He turned back to AOC. "Let me explain why this matters, Congresswoman. Federal PACs can only contribute $5,000 directly to a campaign. That's the law. But if your chief of staff's PAC was paying your boyfriend as a way to funnel money to you personally, money that then supported your living expenses while you campaigned, that's a scheme to evade contribution limits." Cruz's voice hardened. "Your chief of staff controlled the PAC. The PAC paid your boyfriend. Your boyfriend lived with you. You were paying your chief of staff's company." He paused. "See how that looks? It's a circle. And in that circle, donor money meant for campaign expenses might have been flowing into your personal life." The room was so quiet you could hear the ventilation system humming through the walls. Cruz's voice took on a more somber tone. "Let me tell you who funded this operation, Congresswoman. Not billionaires, not corporate executives, working people. A retired teacher in Ohio who sent you $50 because she believed you would fight for public education. A nurse in California who gave $27 because she wanted Medicare for all. A student in Texas with $40,000 in debt who scraped together $35 because you promised to fight for loan forgiveness. His voice grew heavier. Those people gave you their money, money they couldn't really afford to give. And where did it go? To a PAC controlled by your chief of staff, to your chief of staff's private company, to your boyfriend. He leaned forward. Did any of them know that's where their donations would end up? Did any of them consent to funding Riley Roberts' marketing consulting? Cruz shook his head slowly. You talk about fighting for the little guy. You talk about standing up against the powerful. But when the little guy gave you their hard-earned money, your operation funneled it through a maze of PACs and LLCs that nobody could follow. He leaned back slightly. You came to Congress promising to drain the swamp. But Congresswoman, you didn't drain the swamp. You brought it with you. Your boyfriend got paid. Your chief of staff's companies got paid. And those working-class donors who sent you $27 because they believed in your message. He paused. They got played. Cruz took a sip of water, setting the glass down with deliberate care. The hearing room remained eerily quiet. AOC sat rigid, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the table. In the gallery, a young woman who'd been nodding along with AOC's earlier testimony now sat with her arms crossed, her expression troubled. Let's talk about Saikat Chakrabarti, Cruz continued, setting down his glass. The man at the center of all of this, your chief of staff, the architect of your campaign, the controller of the PACs and LLCs we've been discussing. He pulled out a new set of documents. On August 2, 2019, Chakrabarti abruptly resigned from your office. The official story was that he wanted to work on climate policy. Very noble, very convenient. Cruz's voice took on a sardonic edge. But let's look at what was actually happening in August 2019. First, the FEC was actively investigating the PAC payments we just discussed. Second, multiple ethics complaints had been filed. And third, perhaps most importantly, your own Democratic colleagues were demanding that you fire him. He read from a news article. Fox News reported that Democratic lawmakers asked Ocasio-Cortez to fire Chakrabarti in an attempt to start over. The Intercept reported that his departure came after public divisions within the House Democratic Caucus. Cruz looked up. Even the official House Democratic Caucus Twitter account, controlled by Representative Hakeem Jeffries, attacked your chief of staff directly. He found the relevant quote, and I quote from the House Democrats' official account. Who is this guy, and why is he explicitly singling out a Native American woman of color? That was their response after Chakrabarti attacked Congresswoman Sharice Davids for her vote on a border bill. He looked up at AOC. Your own party was furious with your chief of staff. They accused him of racism. They demanded he be removed. And then, facing FEC investigations and Democratic revolt, he suddenly decided to leave to work on climate policy. Cruz shook his head slowly. That's quite a coincidence, isn't it? The man who controlled the dark money operation, the man who paid your boyfriend, the man who funneled $1 million through unregistered companies. He just happened to resign right when the investigations were heating up, right when your own party wanted him gone. AOC finally spoke, her voice tight. Saikat left to work on the Green New Deal. He wanted to focus on climate. Ah yes, the Green New Deal. Cruz interrupted smoothly. Let's talk about that. Because before he left, your chief of staff gave a very revealing interview. He found the relevant document. This was reported by the Washington Post. In July 2019, Chakrabarti was asked about the Green New Deal, and here's what he said. I want to read this exactly because it's important. Cruz read slowly, emphasizing each word. Do you guys think of it as a climate thing? He asked. Because we really think of it as a how do you change the entire economy thing. He let the quote hang in the air like a confession. Your own chief of staff admitted it, Cruz said, his voice rising. The Green New Deal, your signature proposal, the plan you say will save the planet, was never primarily about climate. It was about, in his words, changing the entire economy. Cruz's voice carried a note of triumph now. That's not environmentalism, Congresswoman. That's socialism. That's government control of every sector of American life. And your chief of staff admitted you were using climate change as a Trojan horse to smuggle it in. He continued before AOC could respond. Let me list what else Chakrabarty did before his convenient resignation. He compared moderate Democrats to the Southern Democrats who fought against civil rights in the 1940s. He wore a t-shirt featuring Subhas Chandra Bose, an Indian nationalist who allied with Adolf Hitler and broadcast Nazi propaganda. He constantly attacked fellow Democrats on Twitter, creating chaos within your party. Cruz spread his hands. This is the man who built your political career, the man who controlled your dark money operation, the man who admitted your signature policy was never really about what you claimed. And when the heat got too intense, he disappeared, leaving you to answer for everything. He paused, letting his words settle. But you haven't answered, have you? You've never explained where that $1 million went. You've never explained why your boyfriend got paid. You've never addressed your chief of staff's admission about the Green New Deal. You've just attacked anyone who asked questions. Cruz leaned forward. That's not transparency, Congresswoman. That's a cover-up. Cruz shifted in his chair, his tone becoming almost conversational, the calm before another storm. Let's step back from the financial scandals for a moment, he said. Let's talk about your qualifications to lecture Congress about economic policy. AOC straightened slightly, perhaps relieved at the change of subject. I have a degree in economics from Boston University. Yes, you do, Cruz agreed pleasantly. And you mention that credential frequently when discussing policy. You've said, and I quote, I studied economics. You've used your degree to claim expertise on tax policy, labor markets, and government spending. He smiled slightly, not warmly. So I was confused when I watched your interview on PBS's Firing Line in July 2018. Margaret Hoover asked you about the strong economy and low unemployment rate. Do you remember what you said? AOC's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. I remember the interview. Let me refresh your memory. Cruz pulled out a transcript. You said, and this is a direct quote, unemployment is low because everyone has 2 jobs. Unemployment is low because people are working 60, 70, 80 hours a week and can barely feed their family. He set down the transcript. Now, I'm not an economist. I have a law degree. But even I know that's not how unemployment is calculated. And I would think someone with an economics degree from Boston University would know it too. Cruz's voice took on a professorial tone. Let me explain for the American people watching. The unemployment rate counts people, not jobs. If you have 1 job, you're counted as employed. If you have 2 jobs, you're still counted as employed once. Whether someone works 1 job or 5 jobs has absolutely no effect on the unemployment rate. He picked up another document. PolitiFact, which I'm sure you'll agree is not a conservative outlet, rated your statement. Their verdict, pants on fire. That's their worst rating. The rating they reserve for statements that are not just wrong but spectacularly, laughably wrong. Cruz read from the fact check. Even taking into account rhetorical excess, her statement is off in multiple ways. Fewer than 1 in 20 employed Americans holds a second job of any type, and the people who might be working as much as 70 or 80 hours a week represent a tiny fraction of that tiny fraction. He looked up. The actual numbers. About 5% of workers hold multiple jobs. That's not everyone. And that rate was actually lower than it had been during the economic boom of the 1990s. You weren't just wrong, Congresswoman. You were backwards. AOC leaned into her microphone. I was making a broader point about working families struggling. You were making a false point, Cruz interrupted. And here's what's remarkable. When fact-checkers called you out, you didn't correct yourself. You doubled down. You said you were making a broader point. But you can't make a broader point by getting the basic facts completely wrong. He set down the fact-check. Let me quote Harvard economist Gabriel Chodorowicz, who explained why you were wrong. Whether someone has multiple jobs doesn't enter into the construction of the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate is calculated from a survey of individuals where each individual is classified as having a job, without a job and actively searching, or out of the labor force. Cruz spread his hands. This is Economics 101, literally the first week of any introductory course, and you got it completely wrong while trying to sound authoritative on national television. His voice hardened. So let me connect the dots. You have dark money schemes you apparently don't understand. You have campaign finance laws you apparently don't understand. And you have basic economics you apparently don't understand. But you're confident enough to lecture Congress about corruption. Confident enough to propose reshaping the entire American economy. Confident enough to tell us your plans will save the planet. Cruz leaned forward. Congresswoman, you don't understand how the unemployment rate is calculated. Why should anyone trust you to calculate the costs and benefits of a $93 trillion proposal? Cruz paused, organizing his next set of documents. When he looked up, his expression had shifted, less prosecutorial, more sorrowful. Let's move from theory to practice, he said quietly. Let's talk about what happens when your ideas affect real people. Let's talk about Amazon. AOC's chin lifted slightly. I'm proud of that fight. I'm sure you are. Cruz's voice remained soft, almost gentle. Let me tell you what the people of Queens think about it. He pulled out a folder marked Amazon HQ2. November 2018. Amazon announces that after a nationwide search, they've chosen 2 locations for their second headquarters. One in Arlington, Virginia. One in Long Island City, Queens, right next to your district. Cruz read from an economic analysis. The deal: Amazon would invest $2.5 billion in New York. They would create 25,000 direct jobs. Average salary, $150,000. Over time, the development would generate more than $10 billion in tax revenue for the state and city. He looked up. 25,000 jobs, Congresswoman, in your backyard. Jobs for your constituents. Good jobs, jobs with benefits. Jobs that would lift families out of poverty and into the middle class. Cruz's voice remained measured. And what did you do? You led the opposition. You called it corporate greed. You attacked the tax incentives. You said, and I have the tweet right here, Amazon is a billion-dollar company. The idea that it will receive hundreds of millions of dollars in tax breaks at a time when our subway is crumbling and our communities need more investment, not less, is extremely concerning. He set down the tweet. Now let me explain how tax incentives work, because I don't think you understood them at the time. New York wasn't giving Amazon $3 billion. They were offering to reduce Amazon's future taxes if, and only if, Amazon created the promised jobs. No jobs, no tax break. It was performance-based. Cruz spoke slowly, as if explaining to a child. The money didn't exist yet. It would have been generated by Amazon's presence, by the jobs, by the economic activity, by the ripple effects throughout the local economy. You can't invest money that doesn't exist. You can't redirect funds that haven't been created. He pulled out another document. But you didn't understand that, or you didn't care. You rallied opposition. You attacked the deal relentlessly on social media. And in February 2019, Amazon announced they were pulling out of New York. Cruz read AOC's celebratory tweet slowly. Anything is possible. Today was the day a group of dedicated, everyday New Yorkers and their neighbors defeated Amazon's corporate greed, its worker exploitation, and the power of the richest man in the world. You celebrated, Congresswoman. You called it a victory. He set down the paper. But let me tell you what you actually achieved. Cruz's voice grew heavier. 25,000 jobs, gone. Average salary, $150,000, gone. According to J.P. Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon, those direct jobs would have created another 75,000 indirect jobs. Quote, people who prepare meals and clean floors, to engineers, to marketing people, to lawyers, to accountants, to service that whole ecosystem. He leaned forward. That's 100,000 total jobs you helped kill, Congresswoman, in your own backyard, for your own constituents, and you took a victory lap. AOC's voice rose sharply. Amazon was demanding corporate welfare. Amazon came anyway, Cruz interrupted. Did you know that? December 2019, less than a year after your victory, Amazon announced they were opening an office in Manhattan, leasing space, hiring workers. No subsidies required. He paused meaningfully. But instead of 25,000 jobs, they're bringing about 1,500. Instead of a major headquarters transforming Long Island City, Queens gets nothing. Virginia gets the headquarters, the jobs, the economic development. Everything you threw away. Cruz's voice dropped lower. You claimed you saved New York $3 billion, but you cost them 25,000 jobs. You cost them billions in tax revenue that would have been generated. You cost working families the opportunity to earn $150,000 salaries. He pulled out one final document. When COVID hit in 2020, New York faced catastrophic job losses. The city's independent budget office estimated they could lose 475,000 jobs and $9.7 billion in tax revenue. And an editorial in the New York Daily News asked the obvious question. Wouldn't it be nice if the city and state at least knew that one of the world's largest companies, one of the rare concerns positioned to thrive through the crisis, had made a long-term commitment to locate between 25,000 and 40,000 high-paying jobs here? Cruz's voice was barely above a whisper. You cost your constituents 25,000 jobs to prove a political point, and then you bragged about it. That's not progressive politics, Congresswoman. That's economic vandalism. He paused, gathering himself for what came next. But let me make this concrete, because numbers can feel abstract. Let me tell you about real people. Cruz's voice took on a different quality, softer, more personal. There's a woman named Maria. She lives in your district. She works 2 jobs, and before you say it, yes, some people actually do work 2 jobs. She's a housekeeper at a hotel during the day. She cleans offices at night. She has 3 kids. She hasn't taken a vacation in 4 years. He paused. Maria's son just graduated from CUNY with a degree in computer science. He's smart. He works hard, but he can't find a job that pays more than $45,000. He's living in his mother's apartment trying to pay off student loans. Cruz's voice hardened slightly. Amazon was going to hire 25,000 people, average salary $150,000. They were going to hire software engineers, data analysts, project managers. They were going to hire people like Maria's son. He leaned forward. But you killed that. You celebrated killing it. And Maria's son, he's still living in her apartment, still making $45,000, still drowning in debt. AOC opened her mouth to respond, but Cruz continued. There's a man named James. He owns a small restaurant near where Amazon would have built. He's been there for 12 years. He was looking at the Amazon deal thinking, 25,000 workers who need lunch, 25,000 workers who might stop by for dinner, 25,000 potential customers. Cruz's voice dropped. After you killed the deal, James had to lay off 2 employees. He's barely hanging on. During COVID, he almost lost everything. He told a reporter, and this is a direct quote, "I think about Amazon every day. I think about what could have been." He spread his hands. These aren't statistics, Congresswoman. These are your constituents, people you were elected to represent, people whose lives would have been transformed by those jobs, and you sacrificed their futures because Amazon was founded by a billionaire you don't like. Cruz's voice rose slightly. You claim to fight for working families. But when working families had a chance at $150,000 jobs, you fought to take that chance away. When small business owners could have seen their revenues double, you celebrated their loss. He shook his head slowly. That's not progressive. That's not fighting for the little guy. That's ideology over people, and your constituents are paying the price. Cruz took a deep breath, as if gathering strength for the final assault. Let's talk about your vision for America, he said. The Green New Deal, your signature proposal, the plan you say will save the planet. He pulled out a thick report. Or, as your chief of staff admitted before his convenient resignation, the plan to change the entire economy. Not a climate thing, an economy thing. Cruz opened the report. The American Action Forum conducted an analysis of the Green New Deal. This is a center-right think tank, but it's run by Douglas Holt-Zekin, who served as director of the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. He's not a partisan hack. He's a serious economist. Cruz began reading the numbers slowly, deliberately. Estimated cost over 10 years, between $51 trillion and $93 trillion. Let me break that down. $36 trillion for universal health care, up to $44.6 trillion for a guaranteed jobs program, $5.4 trillion to transition to renewable energy. He looked up. Let's put $93 trillion in perspective. The entire federal budget is about $6 trillion per year. Your plan would cost more than 15 times the entire federal budget every year for 10 years. Cruz continued. The total GDP of the United States is about $25 trillion. Your plan would cost almost 4 times our entire economy. The national debt is about $31 trillion. Your plan would triple it, and then some. He set down the report. The Heritage Foundation modeled just a fraction of the Green New Deal, the carbon tax component. Their findings: 1.4 million jobs lost, $3.9 trillion in GDP reduction. Household electricity costs up 12 to 14%, and that's just modeling a tiny piece of your proposal. Cruz shook his head slowly. When asked what we can say about how much the Green New Deal would cost, Noah Kaufman, a research scholar at Columbia University's Center on Global Energy Policy, said, and I quote, basically nothing. Why? Because your plan is so vague, so fantastical, that serious economists can't even model it. He leaned forward. Your plan calls for net zero emissions by 2030. That's 7 years away. You want to rebuild every building in America for energy efficiency. Eliminate air travel and replace it with high-speed rail. Guarantee a job to every American who wants one. Cruz's voice took on an incredulous tone. California has been trying to build one high-speed rail line for over a decade. It's billions over budget and years behind schedule, and they still haven't finished. You want to replace every airplane in America with trains. He pulled out one final document. In March 2019, Senator McConnell brought the Green New Deal to a vote in the Senate. The result: 0 to 57. Not a single senator voted for it. Not one. Not even the Democrats. Your own party ran away from your signature proposal. Cruz spread his hands. Senator Ed Markey, who co-sponsored the resolution with you, voted present. He wouldn't even vote for his own bill. That's how unserious your proposal is. That's how fantastical. Even the people who support you publicly won't put their names on it when it actually counts. He leaned back. You've built a brand on this proposal. You've made it the centerpiece of your political identity. And it costs $93 trillion, would destroy millions of jobs. And your own chief of staff admitted it was never really about climate in the first place. Cruz's voice dropped. It was about socialism, about government control, about changing the entire economy. And you've been selling it to the American people as environmentalism. The hearing room had grown deathly quiet. AOC sat motionless. Her earlier confidence had completely evaporated. Her press secretary had stopped taking notes. Even the reporters had stopped typing, waiting. Cruz straightened the papers in front of him, his movements slow and deliberate. Let me summarize what we've learned today, Congresswoman. His voice was quiet now, almost conversational, but it carried to every corner of the chamber. You've built your political career on one central message: that you're different, that you're honest, that you fight corruption while everyone else enables it, that you represent working people while everyone else serves the powerful. He held up one finger. But your chief of staff ran a $1 million dark money operation. He created PACs that funneled money to private companies he controlled. Companies that, in at least one case, don't appear to be registered anywhere. Money from working-class donors disappeared into a black hole, and you've never explained where it went. A second finger. Your boyfriend received $6,000 from a PAC controlled by your chief of staff, while your campaign was paying that same chief of staff's company. The FEC received complaints alleging this might be an illegal scheme to funnel money to you personally, and you've never provided a clear explanation. A third finger. When the investigations heated up and your own Democratic colleagues demanded action, your chief of staff conveniently resigned. The man who built your career, who controlled your financial operation, who knew where all the money went. He vanished to work on climate policy. And before he left, he admitted your signature proposal was never really about climate at all. A fourth finger. You have an economics degree, but you don't understand how the unemployment rate is calculated. PolitiFact gave you their worst rating, pants on fire, for claiming unemployment is low because everyone has 2 jobs. You lecture Congress about economic policy while getting basic facts spectacularly wrong. A fifth finger. You killed 25,000 jobs in your own district to prove a political point about corporate welfare. Then Amazon came to New York anyway, without subsidies, bringing only 1,500 jobs instead of 25,000. Your constituents lost out. You took a victory lap. Cruz lowered his hand. And your signature policy proposal, the Green New Deal, costs up to $93 trillion, would destroy millions of jobs, received 0 votes in the Senate, and was admitted by your own chief of staff to be about changing the entire economy, not saving the climate. He paused, letting the silence stretch. You came here today to lecture this committee about dark money and corruption, but your operation ran the darkest money scheme in progressive politics. You came here to demand transparency, but you've never been transparent about where your donors' money went. You came here to champion working families, but you killed 25,000 jobs that could have lifted working families out of poverty. Cruz leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The difference between us, Congresswoman, isn't ideology. I'm a conservative. You're a progressive. We disagree about policy. That's fine. That's democracy. His voice hardened. The difference is honesty. I tell people what I believe and let them decide. I don't pretend to be something I'm not. I don't build a brand on fighting corruption while running a corrupt operation. I don't lecture about transparency while hiding money in shell companies. Cruz's eyes locked on AOC's. You're not the future of the Democratic Party, Congresswoman. You're not even a new kind of politician. You're the oldest kind of politician. Someone who says one thing and does another. Someone who builds a following by promising what you can't deliver. Someone who attacks others for the very things you do yourself. He sat back. The only thing new about you is the Instagram filter, but underneath it, you're just another politician who got caught. A long, heavy silence filled the chamber. Cruz spoke one final time, his voice quiet but clear. I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman. Senator Graham's gavel fell. This hearing is adjourned. The room erupted, voices shouting, reporters rushing toward the exits, cameras flashing. But through it all, one image dominated. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sitting alone at the witness table, staring straight ahead, saying nothing. She had no response. There was nothing to say. 3 days later, the headline appeared everywhere. Cruz-AOC hearing goes viral, 87 million views and counting. The clip of Cruz's closing statement had become the most-watched political video of the year. It played on loop on Fox News. It was dissected on MSNBC. Even outlets sympathetic to AOC couldn't avoid covering it. Cable news panels analyzed every word. Political commentators offered hot takes. Social media exploded with reactions, memes, arguments. The Washington Post fact-checked Cruz's claims. Their verdict, mostly accurate. They noted that the FEC complaints were real. The financial transfers were documented. The Chakrabarty quotes were verified. The Amazon jobs numbers were correct. They found minor quibbles with some of Cruz's characterizations, but the core facts were sound. The New York Times editorial board, while defending AOC's policy positions, acknowledged that the questions Senator Cruz raised about campaign finance deserve answers. They called for a full accounting of the LLC payments and urged AOC to provide detailed explanations. But no answers came. 3 weeks later, AOC's approval rating in her district dropped 11 points. A Siena College poll showed that 53% of voters in her district had concerns about her transparency, up from 28% before the hearing. Among voters under 30, her base, her favorability had dropped 15 points. A primary challenger announced. His name was Juan Martinez, a local union organizer who'd supported AOC in 2018. His announcement speech was devastating in its simplicity. "I believed in Alexandria. I gave to her campaign. I knocked on doors for her. But I can't support someone who won't answer basic questions about where the money went. We deserve better. We deserve someone who practices what they preach." His campaign slogan appeared on posters throughout the district: transparency, accountability, results. Below it, in smaller text, "the change we were promised." AOC's office released a statement calling Cruz's presentation a politically motivated smear based on right-wing conspiracy theories. But the statement didn't address any specific allegation. It didn't explain the LLC payments. It didn't clarify the boyfriend's compensation. It didn't respond to Chakrabarty's admission about the Green New Deal. It was, in the words of one commentator, a non-denial denial. 6 weeks later, AOC held a town hall in the Bronx. It was her first time facing constituents since the hearing. The room was packed, but the atmosphere was different from her previous town halls. Less adoring, more skeptical. A woman in the front row stood up. She looked to be in her 50s, wearing scrubs that suggested she'd come straight from a hospital shift. "Why did your chief of staff's company get paid over $1 million?" she asked. Her voice wasn't angry, just tired, disappointed. Where did that money go? AOC's response was halting, defensive. Those were legitimate campaign expenses. The FEC never found any wrongdoing. But you never explained what the money was for, the woman pressed. You talk about transparency, so be transparent. Tell us where the money went. AOC couldn't answer. She pivoted to talking about her legislative accomplishments, about the bills she'd introduced, about the fights she was fighting. But the woman sat down, shaking her head, unsatisfied. In the back of the room, a man held a sign. It had become ubiquitous at her public appearances since the hearing. It read simply, "Dark Money Socialist." The phrase had stuck. What began as Cruz's accusation had become a label, a shorthand for everything her critics believed about her. Conservative media used it constantly. But more damaging, some progressive critics, disappointed by the unanswered allegations, had adopted variations of it. The dark money hypocrite, the Instagram socialist, the fraud from Queens. Her signature phrase, "tax the rich," had been weaponized against her. Someone created a meme showing her at the Met Gala in her Tax the Rich dress, with a caption, "Wearing a $35,000 dress to lecture people about inequality while running a dark money operation." The meme went viral, shared millions of times across platforms. 2 months later, Senator Ted Cruz sat in his office in Houston, reviewing constituent mail. His aide knocked on the door. "The numbers from the hearing are in," she said. "Combined views across all platforms, over 200 million. It's the most-watched congressional hearing testimony since Watergate." Cruz nodded slowly. "It was never about the views." "Then what was it about?" Cruz set down the letter he'd been reading. "She built a brand on moral superiority, on being better than everyone else, cleaner, more honest, more committed to the little guy." He paused. "But she wasn't any of those things. Her operation was as dirty as any I've seen. Dirtier, maybe, because she hid it behind all that self-righteousness." He turned to look out the window at the Houston skyline. The American people deserve to know who they're really voting for, not the Instagram image, not the carefully crafted brand, the real person, the real record. His aide waited. "She'll survive," Cruz continued. "She's talented. She knows how to work the media, but she'll never be able to claim the moral high ground again, not without someone reminding everyone what her operation actually did." He turned back to his desk. "That's accountability. That's how democracy is supposed to work. You make claims, you get held to them. You demand standards, you get judged by them. You attack others for corruption, you better make sure your own house is clean." He picked up the next letter. Hers wasn't. 3 months later, in a surprise announcement, AOC declared she would not seek leadership positions in the next Congress. She cited a desire to focus on constituent services and grassroots organizing. Political observers noted that her influence within the Democratic caucus had waned significantly since the hearing. Progressive groups that once treated her as their standard-bearer had quietly begun promoting other voices. Representative Katie Porter's star was rising. Representative Pramila Jayapal was being mentioned more frequently as a progressive leader. AOC was still famous, still followed by millions on social media, but her political capital had been spent. The dark money socialist label had proved impossible to shake. In a profile for The Atlantic, a Democratic strategist who requested anonymity offered this assessment. She broke the cardinal rule of politics. She built her entire brand on being different, on being clean, on being morally superior to everyone else. And then she got caught doing exactly what she accused everyone else of doing. That's not something voters forget. The hypocrisy is what kills you. The fact that you positioned yourself as better than everyone else, and then turned out to be just as bad, or worse. The article concluded with a quote from AOC herself, from an interview conducted 6 weeks after the hearing. "I have no regrets about fighting for working families. I have no regrets about taking on powerful interests. And I have no regrets about my record." But notably, she didn't address Cruz's specific allegations. She never did. And in Washington, that silence spoke louder than any statement could have. 8 months later, AOC was walking through the halls of the Rayburn House office building when a group of interns recognized her. In the old days, before the hearing, they would have rushed over for selfies. They would have gushed about her Instagram. They would have asked for autographs. Now one of them simply held up her phone and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Hey, it's the dark money socialist." Her friends laughed. AOC kept walking, her face a mask, but inside something twisted. The nickname had become inescapable. It appeared in op-eds and cable news chyrons. Conservative influencers used it as shorthand. Even some progressive critics, disappointed by the unanswered allegations, had adopted variations of it. Tax the rich had been replaced by something far less flattering. In a podcast interview, a former aide who had left her office spoke anonymously about the mood after the hearing. "It was devastating," the aide said. "She really believed she was different. She really believed her operation was clean. And then Cruz just dismantled that narrative piece by piece with receipts." The interviewer asked how AOC had responded internally. She was angry, she wanted to fight back, but there was nothing to fight back with. The facts were the facts. The FEC complaints were real. The payments were documented. Chakrabarty's quotes were on video. A pause. She kept saying she did everything legally, but that wasn't the point. The point was hypocrisy. She'd spent years attacking dark money while her own operation was as opaque as anything in Washington. Legal or not, it destroyed her brand. The aide's voice grew quieter. "I think that's what hurt most. Not the allegations themselves, but the realization that she wasn't who she thought she was. That the movement she'd built was based on a story that wasn't entirely true." 1 year later, the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History opened a new exhibit on 21st century political communication. Among the artifacts, AOC's "Tax the Rich" dress from the 2021 Met Gala. The placard beside it had been updated since the dress was first acquired. It now included a note about the House Ethics Committee investigation that followed the event. The investigation that found she had violated House rules by accepting impermissible gifts. Below that, a smaller note mentioned the Cruz hearing and its aftermath. The dress that was supposed to symbolize a political revolution had become something else entirely. A reminder that in politics, as in life, the gap between image and reality eventually catches up with everyone, even, especially, those who built their careers on closing it. Final scene. 2 years after the hearing, a young woman sat in a coffee shop in Queens, scrolling through her phone. She was 24. She had voted for AOC twice. She had donated $50 to her first campaign. She had believed. Now she was reading an article about AOC's declining influence, about the unanswered questions, about the dark money socialist label that wouldn't go away. She thought about that $50. Where had it gone? To the campaign, to Brand New Congress LLC, to Riley Roberts's marketing consulting. She would never know. She thought about how she had defended AOC on social media, how she'd attacked anyone who criticized her as sexist or racist or a tool of the establishment, how fiercely she'd believed that AOC was different, that she was the future, that she would change everything. And she thought about Ted Cruz, of all people, being the one to expose what she now suspected had always been true, that AOC was never really different. She was just better at pretending to be. The young woman closed her phone. She wouldn't donate again. She wouldn't defend again. She wouldn't believe again, not in AOC and maybe not in anyone. That was the real cost of the dark money socialists' downfall. Not just one politician's career, but the trust of an entire generation that had dared to hope for something better. And that trust, once broken, might never be repaired.